Labor costs, the trouble with North American agricultural trade and our imbalance. That's what we're talking about in this episode of the Business of Agriculture. Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of the Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with Pattern Ag's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field, then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. So great to be here. Glad you're here. If you listen to this show regularly, you know that we've been talking a little bit about trade because I think trade's very important. We're talking about here in North America, and I mean American agriculture, particularly here in the U.S., where most of my listeners are, and in Canada. We've been very trade heavy for decades. And I had John Newton on, chief economist for the U.S. Senate Committee on Ag and Forestry and Nutrition. And we are going to be in our worst trade imbalance here in the United States that we've ever been in. We're projecting a $32 billion trade imbalance in the year 2024. This is the fourth in the last 6 years that we've run a trade imbalance. For 60 years prior to that, we were at a trade positive, meaning we sold more agricultural goods than we bought. Now we're 4 years out of 6 going to be buying more dollars worth of goods than we sell. If you listen to that episode, there's a couple of reasons for it. One of them is commodity prices, traditional commodities, corn and soybeans, wheat. We grow a lot of that here in the U.S. Commodity prices are down, but also tropical goods, the things that we buy from other countries because we cannot grow them or we cannot grow them much of the year. We still have a pretty big appetite for that. Avocados is a great example. Also, then there's this big reality, labor. You know, and I know, if you are listening to this, you are probably in the U.S. or Canada, because that's where the bulk of my listeners are. You know that we pay a hell of a lot more for someone to show up and work than happens in developing or even completely undeveloped countries. A lot of our produce comes from those types of places. So that's why I've got Jamie Clover Adams. She's the executive director for Michigan Asparagus. I was connected to Jamie by my buddy Brandon Yacht. Brandon Yacht is a Canadian, so you know that means he's awesome, and he likes to drink a Molson once in a while. Brandon said, "Hey, if you're going to talk about trade, I think you really should address this issue where there's a big trade imbalance: the cost of labor." We've got it in Canada, we've got it in the United States. We've especially got it in products that require a lot of hands, that require a lot of labor, not corn and soybeans, because that's very, very automated, but things that we require a lot of touch, which means specialty crops. So Jamie has basically made this her cause for a long time. She's got a tremendous amount of data about this. Jamie, you said it before we hit record. I said, is it really just about labor or it's just the cost of labor? And you said, ask any of my growers that I represent, and they're going to tell you it's all about the cost. And also, our hands are tied because it's a government problem. So let's just start with the cost and give me by the way, thanks for being here, and give me the overview as you see it from your perspective.
Thank you, Damian. I appreciate being here. Just on the cost side, you know, there are a lot of labor issues across our country and in the economy, but for agriculture, the cost of labor is just astronomical compared to what we can charge in the market for our products. And it goes back to trade for things like asparagus and blueberries and squash and zucchini, things that are imported into our country. As you said, the labor costs in Mexico, Peru, and other countries are so much lower than ours. That effectively sets the ceiling for what our growers can get in the market. And so asparagus, which I know the very best, you know, it's run about the last 5 years of about the same per pound in the market, right around $3. Our costs have gone up 50%. And so the Peruvian and the Mexican asparagus is holding that price down. So as my guys like to say, we're selling into a free market, but the government is setting the price we have to pay for labor. And for hand harvested crops, that's about 60% of your expenses. And
and are we talking, is that in the U.S. specialty crop, or is that for your growers that you represent? Because I'm just curious, 60%, I was going to ask you that. How much of the price of me going and buying something, and it's going to depend on the product. So give me that number right there.
Well, I think it's for most hand harvested crops. It's a little higher in Michigan because the region that we're in, where the government sets that rate, our rate is higher than it is, say, in Georgia, North Carolina, Florida. But for hand harvested crops, it's the same basically for apples, blueberries, and asparagus here in Michigan. It's about 50 to 60% of a grower's costs.
Okay. What about then the issue of, there's some things, for instance, you sent me a list, very well prepared list, and you called it non-banana produce imports. And I thought that was interesting at first. I'm like, why that? Well, because in the history of United States and Canada, we've never grown a banana here. So that stands to reason. They can only be grown somewhere in Central America, South America, and brought here. That makes sense. But a lot of other stuff we can grow, and we do grow, but we also import it, and we're importing it at a much cheaper rate. And it does seem as though it is 100% about the labor being 60% of the cost here. And in those other countries, if I'm paying someone $1 an hour or $2 an hour, it's a significantly smaller part of my cost. So I don't even see how you guys are still growing produce in the United States.
I think part of it is there are some consumers who support local or regional or U.S. grown. Yeah. I think the other thing that we have an advantage when you think about asparagus or other commodities that are coming into the United States from south of the border, they have to travel a whole long way. In Peru, when they put blueberries and they put asparagus on boats and send it to Miami, it takes a while for it to get here. And so you get a fresher product and the consumer gets a better value. You can put those things in your refrigerator, and if you don't have time to use them this week, they'll still be good. You buy imported products, the shelf life just isn't there for consumers. So I think that's a benefit. Some people still eat seasonally in our country. And so, yes, they want to have their strawberries and their blueberries in the winter, but they look forward to Michigan asparagus. They look forward to blueberries from the Midwest or peaches from Georgia or, things that people have kind of grown up with. Right. So I think that's how we continue to do it. And we've squeezed every penny we can. And I think that's for my growers, not just in asparagus, but the other hand harvested things they grow, squash, zucchini, broccoli, apples. To the end of they've squeezed everything they can squeeze out of this.
What about thank you, but what I'm wondering is, and I'm going to go ahead and ask the question. Yes, we can sell the local, regional, we can sell the seasonal. Like you said, get your blueberries when they're coming on, or I'm from northern Indiana, not too far from where you are, where it's strawberries, man. When strawberries come on about the middle of June, it's like, man, they're like, or cherries on the tree, which I don't really eat cherries, but that kind of thing. I get that. But yeah, that doesn't do much for then when it comes to, I want asparagus in September. Yours is the same as theirs. It's all been hung around and frozen or whatever, right? So there's no comparative advantage to the seasonality for much of the year for many of these products, right?
Well, there is when ours is in season because, Mexico is bringing in fresh produce all year round. So, you get that extra kind of seasonal benefit. But if you want to eat asparagus in September or in blueberries in January up here in the north, you can go to the store, and that's a good thing. It's just that they're bringing them in on top of our season. And if you go to anywhere else, and I have traveled, I was Director of Agriculture under Governor Rick Snyder's tenure. We went to China quite often. every year. And we went to South Korea and we went to other places. And the only way that we could get our crops, our produce into their countries was on the off season. So they would take our blueberries, but they only wanted them when they weren't in production. And we don't do that in this country.
Now, that's a big one right there. Let's just go ahead and start with that one. So the point there is you're not even saying, by God, let's ban the imports, because let's face it, you're in Lansing. Are you in Lansing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you might be able to get produce in the summertime and fall in Lansing, but somewhere around about January, you're like, I want some fruits and vegetables. Well, good luck. It's in grandma's basement in a jar. So you're in no way calling for a ban on imports.
No.
You're saying, could we get legislation just to protect the season of a U.S. producer is one of the things you've asked for. And you said that was done by growers in the Southeast, and there was no appetite at all legislatively from our lawmakers. Is that from the states or from the feds?
From the feds. Florida and Georgia have petitioned the federal government, like, you got to do something. First, they did it when we renegotiated NAFTA.
Yep.
And they asked for seasonal exclusions, and that didn't make it into the trade agreements. Then they went to the USTR and said, can we at least have an advisory group to tell you, USTR, about our troubles? And they did that, but I noticed that they also put somebody who represents importers on that group. They wouldn't put anybody from Michigan or from other seasonal places on the group because it was supposed to be for the Southeast. But then they put this person who represents imports. And so we've worked with colleagues down in Georgia and in other parts of the Southeast on, the Farm Bill protects corn producers and soybean producers from world prices. They get, they've got their reference prices, and they don't reflect today's economy, but they're there. We have absolutely nothing. Nothing. We don't have crop insurance. We don't have any kind of safety net. And it's as if, I talk about it in military terms. My husband was a veteran soldier. We are collateral damage is what we are.
So you don't give me a lot of optimism here, Jamie. So what I'm wondering is, there's no protection even for the seasonal aspect of it. Say, hey, you know what? I have all the imports we want, but not during this 12-week run or this 9-week run or whatever it should be. And then also there's no crop insurance, so you're kind of dangling in the wind, whereas makes you think maybe your producer should just switch over and grow soybeans and corn, because you get boatloads of insurability. And frankly, there's a pretty generous, I'm not the first person to have been critical about USDA policy. People ask me all the time, say, is it true the USDA policy favors corn growers? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it does. I work there. It does. But I would say the downside, Damian, of that is, yes, my guys and a lot of my growers are near Lake Michigan. They could sell their land and people could put houses on it and it'd make nice beachfront property. But the communities, so Michigan specialty crop industry is worth about $6 billion to our state. And if these crops go away, if my guys who grow vegetables and fruits pull those out and start growing corn and soybeans, the 3 plants that I can think of in our main county, they go away. Mm-hmm. What do those people do for jobs? What do those communities do for a tax base? Mm-hmm. What happens to not just the H-2A workers that come from Mexico to work on our farms, but all the people that their work also supports, the guys that drive trucks and are the farm.
Yeah, right. And the processing facilities, and then, or roadside stands, or the retailers that get a bump out of saying local Michigan raspberries are here, or whatever the thing should be. Yeah. I agree with all that. I want to get into the reality and the economic part of it with Jamie Clover Adams with talking about some trade, labor costs, and the trouble facing United States and Canadian specialty crop. Before I do that, I want to talk to you, dear listener, about maximizing your acres. Are you participating in a sustainability program? If you aren't, you probably should consider doing so. If commodity revenue, crop revenue is going to be down, Your costs continue to go up, and God knows property taxes are continuing to rise where I am. I'm sure they are where you are too. So you need to maximize your assets. You can do that through a sustainability program, like, for instance, with Truterra. Truterra is focused on supporting farmers at every stage of the sustainability journey to help you maintain, and work with your plan on regenerative management practices. Regenerative management practice to improve agronomic, economic, and environmental sustainability of your operation. You can find out more and find the right program for you. Go to TruterraAg.com, TruterraAg.com. It's a Land O'Lakes company. Check it out. There's the economics of this, Jamie, and obviously I'm all for it. I am completely for it. What I don't understand is what we're just up against this reality. And I was a factory worker. And the factory I worked in, it was old, it polluted, had environmental regulations slapped on it, also the cost of labor. And I only made like $9 an hour, but it's gone. Is this just the unfortunate reality about specialty crop? Will we see a day where, other than a very small niche, our produce just comes from Peru? Yeah, sat on a boat for 2 weeks. Yeah, they picked it before it was even ripe. Is this our reality? I hope not.
I hope not either, Damon. I would say the difference, my mother lost her job that way too at a factory. There's a difference between car seats and food.
Yeah.
And you hear policymakers talk about food security as national security. And then you think about what's going on down in Mexico with the cartels.
Yeah.
And stories we hear about H-2A workers who are basically, they take money from them because they know they have it.
Yep.
Do we really want other people to control the supply of the things that we're supposed to be eating, the healthy fruits and vegetables? And some would say, well, as long as we have our dairy products and our corn, and we can have our processed products. But I would argue that it is important to our country to have that available. And, USDA's focus right now is on small growers and that's fine, helping folks that are just starting out. But if my guys go away, the infrastructure goes away, and there isn't anything for those small guys.
Yeah, there's an aspect to that. That it seems like we've got USDA big macro policy is, the broadacre commodities. And then they still have dairy margin protection programs, and then they'll throw out some, obviously crop insurances and all that. But there's the specialty crop people seem to be getting a little lost, twisting in the wind. If they were 2 acres of organic arugula, there'd be a first-time growers and a whole bunch of horseshit programs, frankly. And the reason I call them horseshit is they prop up something that doesn't have any viability. Like 6 people can eat from the 2-acre organic arugula, whereas your guys are not 2-acre organic arugula. It's a massive business. They are, like you said, they produce vegetables, they produce specialty crops, and they do it in Michigan, not in Peru, not in Costa Rica, not in South America, not in Mexico. So what do you want? You want USDA policy? You want USDA, because subsidies do not sit well. They don't sit well with the consumer. They don't even sit well with me, and I am in agriculture, because it is a propping up of the economic system. It's just like a minimum wage or a rent floor or rent ceiling, anything that seeks to circumvent true supply and demand. And subsidies tend to do that. I understand them. I understand why the USDA does it, but I don't know that that's what we want more of in specialty crops. So what do you think? We talked about protection from being dumped on by foreign entities during the season. What about the rest of the year? Is it subsidies? No. And my guys, what they would say, they don't want subsidies. They want the market to work. So the 2 things they would want, and one is that we get a handle on these costs. The government is artificially setting the price of labor. In Michigan, all in costs. So you pay the hourly rate plus the housing plus the transportation, and it comes out about $30 an hour, which is about what a new production worker makes in the auto industry in our state. Okay,
and
so
let's get those under control.
Yeah, so what you're saying is, and it wasn't a pure marketplace that set that $30. It was by government fiat. It was government. It was dictated to your guys that you're going to pay this amount.
If you want to use this program H2A, and we have no the migrant labor supply that used to work in the fields here in Michigan, they don't come anymore. And there aren't local people. I mean, I've actually had my growers say, when they talk about busing the immigrants up, up to the north, they're like, send them here. We could use some workers.
Yeah.
So we have to have this program. It is integral to our businesses. But when they use a survey that USDA does that takes the average and makes it the minimum, it just spirals on itself, and it is not a reflection. Why can't we have a free market in labor like we do in trade?
Okay, so H2A, H2A does, it's the government says it's a guest worker program, but it's too limited in the amount of people. It seems it doesn't have enough. There's not enough pool. Is that the answer? Is that the problem? Sorry.
Yeah, we don't have enough U.S. workers, and so we have to go elsewhere.
But even within the H2A, if there was 1 million more H2A workers, would the rate come down?
No,
or it would still be stuck at that $30.
And I would argue that it would go up because they survey to find out, and we're finding that wage is spilling over to the rest of agriculture.
Okay.
So if you're a dairy farmer or you're a grain farmer here in Michigan, what my guys are paying their workers, $18.50 an hour plus. Those folks that work on dairies and grain, they know what we're paying, and they're going to their employers and asking for the same thing. So it's just continually pushing up the wages, artificially. And why can't we pay the minimum wage? Use that as your base. In Michigan, it's $10.33. It goes up every year. And then whatever the market would bear, that's what we pay. But we don't get to do that.
Of course, a lot of people are going to say, well, she's in Michigan. She keeps talking about Michigan. I don't think this is a Michigan-only thing. I don't think of all of a sudden you cross the border in Indiana, which we don't grow a hell of a lot of specialty crops here. There's a little bit of a melon trade and some mint and some other things. But I don't think that it matters what state you cross into. This is
it's an issue. One of my growers talked to a new guy he met out in North Dakota who hires H2A workers for calving season. And I know they use them in the dairy industry as well. They can't work year round, but they can work up to 10 months. Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, everywhere east of the Mississippi, California, and Oregon and Washington State use a lot of them. California, compared to their whole pool of workers, H2A is a very small part. And I think that's part of the problem, because California, this is not a problem for California. So they're not focused on fixing it like the rest.
Yeah, so California is arguably the number one ag state, and it's largely because of specialty crops, which have a huge premium attached to them price-wise. And therefore, the last I looked, it was 50% larger than the number 2 ag state, which is Iowa, in terms of revenue.
Yep.
So if California, Jamie, does not, if California is not squawking, then the issue has less national focus from a legislation standpoint.
Yep. And I would say the same thing, though, what I said about other, leaving our commodities for other people to produce. I'd say the same thing about California, because how much longer are they going to have water?
Yeah, right. So that's where California's running out of water, plus they seem to be legislating out agriculture. And then we've got places like you that are telling me this labor thing is just prohibitive. We're clinging on to being the reason we're able to do it on specialty crop is because we're really efficient. We got a freshness factor. We got a seasonality factor. We got a location factor. Maybe a little bit of bonus marketing on playing that up. But aside from that, it's still not. I don't see it working for us. Unfortunately, I mean, I'm looking at oranges. So we lost orange production, or losing orange production in Florida due to citrus greening, but Brazil seems to be able to pick up that slack with orange production pretty handily. Am I right in assuming this could happen across the board on a lot of the other specialty crops?
It could, if we don't do something. I mean, now you have some specialty crops like potatoes and onions that are kind of the staple things that we buy in our grocery store. Apples, you see some imports, but not like we do in some of the hand harvested vegetables.
Yeah.
So their problems are a little bit different. I think there is, if we can get the labor costs down and we can get some recognition of some sort, an insurance product, price loss coverage, something that helps us when the market, like when they're, you know, flooding our market during our season. I mean, I think we as a society have to decide, is this important to us?
Yeah. And I don't know that the average consumer, to be honest, I think there are consumers that care. We bash sometimes on the Whole Foods type consumer because they're going to go and pay a premium. And I've bashed on it jokingly, but I also said we sure as hell better appreciate those people, because any consumer that's, granted, that fall for the organic propaganda that's healthier, which it's not. But the point is, if they're willing to go and pay a premium for something that makes them feel good, we should applaud that all day long. And whether that's Michigan blueberries or organic arugula, whatever. But the reality on that is there enough consumer sentiment to push any legislation? I'm not sure that there is.
I'm not sure either. But on the other hand, I'd like to figure out a way where the retailers aren't able to use cheap imports to hold down prices.
Yeah.
Because, the vegetables that we grow here in America that we don't import too many of, they're getting increases in what the grower's getting with the chain. Prices are going up in potatoes and they're going up in onions, but they don't in asparagus, they don't in blueberries, because we've got all this coming in. And I saw this when we tried to do promotion for asparagus last year. I could not give away money to retailers to promote Michigan asparagus because they figured they didn't want to put themselves in a box because they could get Peruvian or Mexican asparagus cheaper.
Yeah.
And so, they're looking out for their bottom line, which good for them. But if there's some way to that downward pressure that those imports put on prices, not that we want to charge an arm and a leg, but when we can't even get, a penny or two extra a pound for asparagus, and our costs have gone up 50-something%.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about a couple other solutions about the labor. Go back to the labor thing on that here in a minute. Before I do, dear listener, premium plant nutrition with the added benefit of biostimulants. That's what we're talking about. Plant nutrition and biostimulants all in one. No one does it better than Redox Bionutrients, a family business in Idaho that's helping growers succeed across the United States and internationally. Redox has a special pallet program for Midwest corn, soybean, wheat growers, providing breakthrough nitrogen optimization with RDXN, in addition to two of their flagship products, Banks and Mainstay. Find out more at redoxgrows.com/Midwest, redoxgrows.com/Midwest. Find out more. Redox been with me since the beginning of this year. We're really happy to have them. By the way, I'm wearing their shirt. Check that out. And if you are checking it out, that means you're watching my YouTube channel. I thank you. If you are not watching my YouTube channel, please go there and subscribe. You know what? I've got to grow this subscription base. I've never really focused on it, but I am now. Go to YouTube, type in Damian Mason. The Damian Mason channel will pop up. Just hit subscribe. It doesn't cost nothing. I'm putting videos out there. I'm putting episodes like this out there. So please check it out. Thank you so much for doing so. All right. If the point is labor, I mean, land expense has something to do with it too. Land is worth more a mile off of Lake Michigan's coast than it is in parts of Peru. But really, labor is the one that's insurmountable. Why not just cheat? Why not just bring a busload of new migrants up and give them a prevailing rate, which is $10 an hour, and say screw it?
Because you could lose your farm by doing that. The wage and hour people will be there. We have advocates that will come if something happens. I mean, I think there was in Georgia or someplace, an unfortunate, or maybe Florida, an unfortunate bus accident. That guys aren't going to do that. You're endangering your crop. You're endangering your farm. If they show up and you have a bunch of illegals, or you're not paying them, you'll lose everything. And yes, land is kind of expensive over on Lake Michigan, but most of my growers are fourth and fifth generation. That's their legacy and turning that over to their children. So they're not going to take those risks.
What about and I've been talking about this for a long time. there's a reality. There's going to be some crops that we won't produce. I mean, if it just requires a lot of human hands. I've also, JV, thought about the meat situation. You can automate, I tell my audiences this, you can automate broiler chicken processing much easier than beef processing. Broilers come in at 6.4 pounds pretty damn routinely. They're very consistent sized. They are, through factory farming, as the negatives call us. We've got a very consistent broiler product. Beef comes in, it might weigh 800 pounds, it might weigh 1,800 pounds. It might be 7 feet tall, it might be 3 feet tall. You can't put an assembly processing facility together with lasers and saws that can have that much disparity. Kind of on specialty crop, it's the same thing. Carrots are mechanically harvested, onions are mechanically harvested, potatoes, to your point, mechanically harvested. A lot less human hands touch it. And we got great productive capacity. We're fine. Something that you have to have a person picking by hand. Is it, in your opinion, that will just go away? I mean, it looks like textiles to me. It looks like T-shirts or whatever, the things we used to make here that we don't anymore. I unfortunately see that being the reality.
I think for some crops, that's probably true. I don't know that it necessarily is for all of them. We have automated blueberry harvesters, for example. They don't, they harvest for frozen product, not for fresh. So maybe there's
too much damage, or what's the difference?
Yeah, they just too much damage. Where you can, if you harvest for the processing market, you can get it into the freezers, and the damage isn't that visible.
And then I want to throw out reality. And I'm not being in any way a naysayer, but I've just been around a number of years, and I look at this and I say, okay, let's say we do lose some of these productions for a while, and it's not, nobody wants to see it. Does it come back?
No.
Generally, in manufacturing, it hasn't. If it left, it didn't come back. The ceiling tile factory that I worked at in 1989 is not back, and it never will come back. But specialty crop, if we got to where we didn't have it, it would come back, probably. But it seems like that's never been the case. We are not going without ceiling tiles, and we're not going without blueberries. So if it does go away, should we really lament it, or should we say, oh, well, that's just the way things work?
I think we should lament it. Policymakers talk about all this concern about China owning land in the United States.
Right.
But they don't care whether we export. We're either going to import our food or import the workers.
Yeah.
One of the two.
Of course, I'm being a little bit, I'm all about American agriculture. In general, the economics of it, I say let certain things run. But when it comes to food autonomy, when it comes to food national security, I am a little reluctant to. And our listeners north of the border have told me. No one from the Trudeau government has told me, but the people that actually know what the hell they're talking about, which would be nobody within the Trudeau government, the people that actually know about government or about agriculture up there, they say things like, Damian, we have these quotas in place for things like dairy because if we didn't, Idaho's dairy production would just go ahead and knock out all the West, and Wisconsin and New York's dairy production would knock out all of the East, and we'd have no dairy production in Canada. And then all of a sudden, 10 years from now, Canada gets sideways with the U.S. And we ain't got no milk. I mean, that's their reasoning for why there is that. So it's a certain amount of protectionism, which again goes against free trade doctrine, but they can stomach it.
Yep.
I don't know if the American consumer will stomach it as well. Most Canadian consumers don't seem to be opposed to, for instance, the dairy protection supply management that they have up there. Because you're kind of almost talking about supply management here. That a certain amount of our produce has to be consumed or grown here, et cetera.
I think, yeah. I mean, we need to have a viable industry because I would argue once it goes away, it will not come back because the infrastructure just won't be there for it. And by
the way, explain that, Jamie, explain that to the person that's like, what's she talking about? Like, you know what? You just go out and plant more asparagus next year if asparagus goes away. No, it's the infrastructure, what that means.
That means for perennial crops, you put asparagus or you put apples in the ground and it takes 3 or 4 years before you have a crop. You have to have pack sheds that are, for fresh product that are millions of dollar investments that individuals make in those sheds. You have processing here in Michigan. We have a lot of processing fruits and vegetables. All those factories will go away, and nobody is going to invest money into that into the future, hoping that down the road they get a profit. That they're just not going to do.
Yeah. I tend to agree. Once it goes away, it probably is gone. I thought I saw that TVs allegedly for a while televisions were going to get made in the United States again, but it was really kind of a scam. They weren't really. It was like I don't know. They put them in a box here or something. But get me out of here. I wish we were more optimistic, but we've got an inflation situation. And inflation, it should never be confused, is created by government spending, period. That then creates this entire distortion in the marketplace. And then companies have to charge more, and then workers demand more. And the unions, your UAW had a huge win. I say yours, meaning you're from Michigan. UAW had a huge win last year. They got like 40% rate increase. The hospitality workers union got a huge win last year. What will change this? What will change it? I'm not sure that I see any lowering of labor rates over the next several years. All that bullshit they told us about inflation was transitory. I said for the first few months I heard that, and I'm like, Lord, they keep using this word transitory. And all my economics, and I took a lot of economics classes, and I keep up with business economics a lot. I never heard this word before. Oh, they mean temporary. Oh, inflation's only temporary. I said, well, good. So is cancer until it kills you. We're in year 4 of inflation, and we're still 70% up from what a normal or acceptable amount of inflation is. We're 70% above that, I should say. I don't see this labor rate getting any better, Jamie. So I'm kind of concerned. Do you have any optimism?
I do. I think that our growers have done a good job of talking to members of Congress about the need to change this. This is in Congress's hands. This isn't the market doing this. This is the government doing this. They created the problem. They need to fix it. And I think that if we can get that labor rate down, or give growers some kind of a credit, or have workers pay for their housing, somehow we can work this out to get these labor costs down more. You're seeing labor issues too in Mexico. I kind of think most of their folks are coming up here to work, and then there's nobody left there to do the work in their field.
So they have shortages. They have shortages on the farms in Mexico, and then they don't have to pay H-2A type rates. They're paying 1/5. They're paying
a couple bucks an hour.
A couple bucks an hour, paying 30. So my point would be, how in the hell, even if we're really efficient, we've got a great product, and we go through all this stuff, the difference between 30, I mean, you're talking about 15 times. Well, I have a hard time believing that we can get there. I mean, I'm sure if they're paying $2 and we're paying $3, that's a 50% change. You're talking about 15 times.
Yeah. Well, we were doing it before the rate, these accelerations started. So Mexican wages haven't really gone up all that much.
And ours have.
And ours have. And so we were doing all right. I mean, we weren't getting rich, but farmers don't get rich. But they can at least keep land in production in these kinds of crops. Maybe they change their mix a little bit, change to the market. But I do think it can be done. Damian, we talk about, okay, let's just let the market run. Well, then let's let the market run for corn and soybean farmers and dairy farmers. Let's just let it go. And whoever's left is left. And I think that, for me personally, is the most irritating thing about this, is we have acknowledged that corn and soybeans and wheat and rice and peanuts and cotton and dairy are important to our country. And we as Americans are supporting that. And yet we cannot support fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, and by the way, and first off, I think you missed sugar. Sugar.
Yeah, being from Michigan.
Sugar is a fairly protected. It's a protected species in agriculture by Washington D.C. So what you're really saying is you think there needs to be a certain amount of protectionism, which like I said, and it happens. It obviously happens. The whole Trump tariffs of 2018 were part of that whole thing. It happens, but it doesn't happen for specialty crops.
No, no.
Because the voter base is too small?
I think that's it. I mean, when you think about like
the lobbying base is too small.
But yeah, how many farmers are involved? They're never going to let, corn and soybeans just kind of do whatever the market says because there are too many voters. We're a smaller group.
Do you think that, two last things on the international aspect of this, the people that are coming across the border, streaming across the border, they're not from Mexico. They're coming through Mexico generally. That's what a lot of folks don't understand. They're coming from all over the world through Mexico. Do they end up in a field? Or do they just, right now, it looks like they get an Obama phone and a room at a hotel. I've read this 9 different places, and they get vouchers and a room at a hotel for temporary lodging, which temporary means, again, how many months are we talking about? I would say no, they don't end up in a field.
And to be fair, and we have a lot of Afghani refugees here in Lansing. They come to our country. They came legally, but they want full-time work. And what we have to offer is seasonal work.
Yeah.
And so when the economy is the way it is right now, where they can stay in the Lansing area and get a permanent job, they're probably not going to go to the west side of Michigan to take a job on a farm. Mm-hmm. So we've got that as well, is that seasonal. But we're not seeing any of these folks show up at our farms.
No. And then lastly, we know that the development of other countries then, has changed the demographics as well as some of the economics of, do we get to where the wage rates in other countries become more competitive with ours? Forever China was cheaper and still is, but it's not as cheap to manufacture there as it once was. Does that bode well for us?
I don't know that I'll see it in my lifetime.
Yeah, right. And then the other one is then the other one, of course, is political upheaval. Maybe China goes away as our supplier for all of our cheap manufactured crap, but maybe Peru goes away because of political turmoil in the country of Peru, and it's not a reliable source. The only problem is there's usually some other developing country that will gladly sell their stuff for next to free. So that's the tough part.
Yeah. And I think in Peru, too, it's water. I mean, they're worse than California, but it's a desert.
Yeah.
We always laugh. They turn their asparagus crop on. They turn the irrigation on and up it comes.
Yeah. Interesting. Any other closing thoughts? No, out of here. Her name is Jamie Clover Adams. She's Executive Director of Michigan Asparagus, and we're talking about trade, and we're talking about the trouble with trade being our labor costs. Are ours the highest in the world, or is Europe higher than ours?
I think Europe. I don't know for a fact, but I suspect Europe is.
Yeah. And they don't have a true H-2A type of program, but it's also I don't think it's sanctioned by the EU, so I don't know. There's such a patchwork of things going over there.
Yeah. I don't know quite how they do it, but they have a lot more protectionism around their crops too.
You think so? Yes, we couldn't take GMO corn or soybeans over there because they said it was because it was not safe, which really meant they were protecting their own producers. All right, thanks for being here. We're talking about labor cost. If you have a topic you want me to dig into, I'm trying to talk about a lot of different aspects of the trade situation because I believe it is absolutely historically significant that for 60 years we were at a trade surplus and now we're at a trade deficit here in the United States of America. And my question is this going to continue? Obviously, we talked to Jamie here. There's a lot of reasons that make you think it probably will. If you're still eating more avocados than your grandma did, and trust me, you are, because grandma never had an avocado, and now we're eating like 15 pounds per American per year, that means they're going to be grown probably offshore. These are the things that we're talking about. So you have another aspect, another nuance of the trade that you would like me to dig into, please drop me a line. Again, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I really appreciate it. Share this with somebody who can learn from it. So next time, thanks for being here, Jamie.
Thank you.
And thanks for being here, dear listener. Until next time, I'm Damian Mason, and this is The Business of Agriculture. Hey, thanks for being here. This episode of the Business of Agriculture was brought to you by Pattern Ag. You've heard me talk about Pattern Ag because I think it's a pretty cool concept. New technology that allows you to predict the problems you're going to have and therefore treat them before those problems cost you money. What kind of problems am I talking about? Pests and disease. Things like cordon rootworm, sudden death syndrome, cyst nematode, and a whole bunch of other bad things that happen out there in the field that can cost you money. Guess what? Pattern Ag will let you find out ahead of time if the disease or the pest pressure is there, and therefore you're treating it before it costs you any money. What a great concept. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to learn more about their product, their technology, how it can make you money, save you yield, and also where you can find a rep that can come out there and do the work for you. Pattern.ag.